Christmas and welcome to the Greg Thompson Sports Show. Tonight, we are going to have some fun going around all of the crazy madness around the NFL this week. We'll talk about the impact of the playoff picture. We'll talk about the impact to our Buffalo Bills. We'll talk about all the different things that happen in both conferences. First, shout out to our incredible sponsors over at Underdog Fantasy. If your season is over, some people might be in the semifinals here, making their way to a championship game. Many folks, their season has come to an end. You can still draft a new team. You can get into basketball. You can get all the other fun things. Go on over, check out Cover One, or check out Underdog and use promo code Cover One, and they will match your first deposit up to $500. You can go have yourself a real good time and be able to draft again, which is way more fun than losing during the regular season. We will jump right in and go through the matchups here this week. There was a lot of craziness as it happened. There was a lot of different things that we were able to see. I'll go through some of the NFC matchups too. There's a fun game on Thursday night. The Rams jumped out to a real big lead. Matthew Stafford was looking fantastic. Puka Nacua looks incredible. Got Kyron Williams working again. They were smoking the Saints. It was 30-7 at one point. They actually let the Saints come back, and there was actually a moment where it looked like they were going to have a chance at kind of a Hail Mary or a game tying, pitchy woo woo, as Scott Van Pelt likes to call it. But ultimately the Rams hold on and don't blow an insane 23-point lead in the fourth quarter. And the Rams right now are I won't say all the way the same as the Bills, but pretty close. They're the team in the NFC that I don't think any of those other teams want to play. So they certainly are a hot team going into the playoffs. The next one was the first one. There was a lot of games that needed to go in the Bills' favor. In my opinion, I think literally every single one of them, except for one, went in the Bills' favor. It started on Saturday afternoon. The Pittsburgh Steelers upset the Cincinnati Bengals, dropping them both to 8-7. The Steelers were virtually eliminated with a loss. They're still not great. They still are in trouble. But this game was a huge kind of wake-up call for Jake Browning. 3 interceptions, some rough decisions. T. Higgins was still making some phenomenal plays, but this was just a dominant. It was 24-0 at halftime for the Steelers. That was the most points they had scored in a half in almost 3.5 years. They were just in control the entire time. Both running backs got fed down the stretch. George Pickens with a ridiculous game, 2 long touchdowns, had a old school Randy Moss Thursday type game that, going through each of those different pieces, that he was 4 catches for 195 yards and 2 touchdowns. So he was averaging like 47.5 yards a catch. Just incredible. So we'll see where that goes and what it lasts, but they brought both teams back to 8-7. And as of right now, it will have both of those teams on the outside looking in. So we'll see where that one continues to. Another game that was, I think this one was debatable on which favored the Bills. I think if you had gone back and told us that every other game was going to go our favor, you probably could have argued that the Texans winning this game and knocking the Browns down to both teams at 9-6 might have been the more valuable outcome. I think it's debatable. In the moment, the Browns winning was the better outcome because it knocked the Texans back and knocked them to 8-7, gave the Bills outright control of the 6th seed at the moment. So again, I think it was debatable in hindsight that maybe it would have been better to chance it and have all 3 teams at 9-6 and play the tiebreaker role, which would give the Bills a shot at the 4 seed if they were able to go that path. The Browns are actually one of the teams that has a significantly better conference record. So the Browns are currently 7-3 to the Bills 5-5 in conference. That's going to be tough to make up for. The Browns finished with games against the Jets and the Texans, or the Jets and the Bengals. I don't know that I expect them to go 0-2 in those two. So I think they're a pretty strong favorite for the number 4 seed or the number 5 seed, the top wildcard spot. But even so, even if they don't, they're still very alive for a playoff spot. And the Texans are in a very interesting spot in a 3-way tie in the AFC South. And that's because in another game here, the Atlanta Falcons helped out the Buffalo Bills and the AFC playoff teams. They beat and controlled and dominated this game against the Indianapolis Colts. The Colts scored first, and then the Falcons ran off 20 straight points. They were up 20, ended the game 29-10 with a ton of field goals. So, a lot of scoring opportunities. I think they ended up with 7 scoring drives, but only 29 points. So one of the better offensive performances from Atlanta in a while. And again, kind of nobody really understood the horseshoe that Indianapolis was riding on, and that eventually this had to come back to earth. So I think this makes sense seeing them, but they are technically, with the tiebreakers, they are the 7 seed in the moment. There are some matchups here where they still have remaining games that are going to be super, super interesting to track and see who's able to take control of different pieces. They end with the Raiders and Texans. I think CJ Stroud's going to come back, so that's going to be interesting to monitor. But they're obviously chasing Jacksonville, who ends with the Panthers and Titans. So they have some winnable games, but they've lost 4 in a row. So it's really hard to gauge where that's going to end up with the AFC South with the current 3-way tie. And it is a 3-way tie, obviously, because of the matchups that we watched. The final one here for the AFC South was Tampa Bay smoking Jacksonville. It knocked Trevor Lawrence out of the game at one point with a shoulder injury. This one, again, was not close, 30-0 before some garbage time points late. And then, obviously, when Lawrence got knocked out of the game, CJ Beathard came in and threw another touchdown. But just complete domination by Tampa Bay, who's kind of taking control of that NFC South. So all 3 AFC South teams losing, all going to 8-7, all in a 3-way tie. Jacksonville currently has the head-to-head win percentage lead out of those 3 teams, but they are, headed in probably the worst trajectory of any team floating out there right now. So it's really hard to say that they're going to come in with anything positive to end the year here. So right now they do control the lead, but they are the team. Like, if I have any opportunity to get up to a 5 seed, God, I would love to play the Jaguars in a 4-5 matchup. That is a very tasty matchup for any team that's the top wild card coming in. And that's a team that I absolutely could see Cleveland going in and winning a playoff game against Jacksonville with the way that they're playing right now. A couple other games didn't have a ton of impact. The Jets win against the Commanders in a game where they were winning 20-0 and 27-7. They did let a bit of a late rally for the Commanders to come back, including taking the lead late in the game, and they go down and kick a game-winning field goal. The only thing funny about this is that it knocked them to hurt them in their draft pick standing. So it cost them a couple spots in the draft order. So I'll always root for that. That's entertaining and fun to see. But Washington's going nowhere. They actually are now going to jump up to the number 3 pick in the draft. And the reason they jumped up to the number 3 pick in the draft is that the New England Patriots won. This was a comical game. The Patriots were absolutely controlling this game. They were up 23-7, and then it literally looked like Belichick called in hey, we got to let them get back in this game. We're going to lose it here. They do. They let the Broncos claw all the way back here, being down 16 in the fourth quarter to tie it with 2 touchdowns and 2 2-point conversions to tie it. They not only tied it, they tied it and got possession back. So after this late touchdown here, they got possession back with a chance to kick the game-winning field goal. Went such a fast 3 and out that they gave the ball back to New England, and God bless him, Bailey Zappi led a game-winning field goal attempt that Chad Ryland, who had missed so badly earlier, he made Belichick swear on screen, hits a 56-yard game-winning field goal that knocked New England from the number 2 draft slot to the number 4 draft slot. For anyone who isn't up on draft prospects, there are 2 very highly touted quarterbacks in Caleb Williams out of USC and Drake May out of North Carolina that are inevitably going to go first and second in this draft. And now, not only that, New England dropped to the number 4 spot, they're probably also going to miss Marvin Harrison Jr., who is the best non-quarterback in this draft in a generational wide receiver prospect. So you absolutely hate to see it. You just hate to see it. It could not happen, to a nicer fan base. They're just such, classy gentlemen of the sport. You hate to see it. It's just a real shame. As I'm getting close to the wrap up here, anybody who has questions, we're going to play with the simulator and go through some scenarios for the Bills at the end. If you have any questions, drop them in the chat, and producer Chris will get them earmarked here to be able to go through and share those as we get ready to wrap up. A couple other games that didn't have a ton of impact. Seattle kept their playoff lives alive, almost screwed this game up with Tennessee. They were down 13-17. Looked like they were going to mess it up. Geno Smith comes back, leads a playoff drive or a game-winning drive, and keeps them in the 7th spot. They are currently in the playoffs. If it were to start today, Tennessee simply playing out the string, not much to play for here. Another one in a team that was trying to keep their hopes alive. The Packers almost lost to the Panthers. The Carolina Panthers almost won 2 games in a row. They did lock up the number 1 overall pick on behalf of the Chicago Bears by losing this game. But yeah, they almost came back and won. They tied it 30-30 with 4 minutes left. Green Bay had to come down and kick a late field goal. They're still on the outside looking in. There's 4 teams tied at 7 and 8, and the Rams and the Seahawks are both 8 and 7. So not a high likelihood based on all the tiebreakers and all the things that are there. But they do at least keep some hope alive with 2 weeks to go in that NFC race. The one game here, another game that didn't matter a ton to the Bills. Or to any playoff race. The Bears beat the Cardinals. This game did matter to the Patriots, keeping that number 4 draft spot instead of the number 3 draft slot with their win. The Bears, obviously, they have the Panthers pick number 1 overall. They're simply playing a little bit better. Honestly, I think Justin Fields is probably playing his way into a chance to be a starter next year for the Raiders or the Falcons or the Steelers. I think Justin Fields is going to be a starting quarterback somewhere next year. I don't think it'll be Chicago. I think it'll be too tempting to restart the rookie quarterback salary clock and being able to bring in that and another first round pick, kind of player top 10 pick that they're going to have in their draft order. So I think that he'll get moved, but I think he's playing well enough that he's going to get himself a chance to do that somewhere else. The Detroit Lions locked up a NFC North Division Championship for the first time in a long, long time. So I actually read a stat. The Browns and the Lions have both won 10 games in the same season since 1953. Pre-Super Bowl, pre-merger, old school NFL was the last time Detroit and Cleveland both had 10 wins in the same season. 2 fan bases I have a great amount of respect for, 2 fan bases who have been very loyal despite obviously not a great deal of success. We'll see where their playoff run goes. I know a lot of people see the 49ers as kind of this unbeatable buzzsaw, but Detroit's a tough team that can run the ball and pass the ball. I think they're going to be interesting to be able to watch. The one matchup that didn't go the Bills' way this weekend was a nail-biter, Dallas and Miami. Dallas on the first drives down the field, has first and goal at the 1, and they fumble. Multiple other kind of brain fart kind of moments. Their defense played really well, held Miami to 5 field goal attempts. They only scored 1 offensive touchdown. They had a chance late. They went down, got the touchdown, had a 20-19 lead. They just could not make the defensive plays to be able to keep Miami from getting into field goal range. They controlled it. Miami earned this game. Obviously we hate on them a lot and give them a hard time. They earned this win. This was a legit win by the Miami Dolphins. I don't think the Cowboys are anything amazing. The Bills obviously beat them worse than the Dolphins did, but this was a tough win against a legit winning team. And the Dolphins hadn't done that all season. This was their first win against an above 500 team. I don't know that the Cowboys are the best, option on that menu, but they're on that menu. There have been moments where the Cowboys look like one of the best teams in the league. So I'm going to credit Miami for getting a win here and winning a game that everything wasn't clicking and going pretty for them, and they found a way to win. This keeps their they have all their hopes alive right now while we're talking. If San Francisco beats Baltimore and they win against Baltimore next week, they could have the number 1 seed and home field advantage throughout the playoffs. So they have a wide range of outcomes, all the way from like a 6 or a 7 seed all the way up to the number 1 seed. So we'll play around with some of those options here in a moment. A game earlier today that was a Christmas present to many Bills fans. Producer Chris and I were talking about this pre-show. The Las Vegas Raiders won a game where their quarterback threw for 62 yards and did not complete a pass after the first quarter. I'm going to say that again. The Las Vegas Raiders won a game where their quarterback did not complete a pass after the first quarter. This wasn't against the Cardinals. This wasn't against the Patriots. This was against the Chiefs, the defending Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs lost to a team who didn't score an offensive touchdown. It was 7 seconds. There was a botched trick play returned for a touchdown. And on the very next offensive play, Jack Jones intercepted Patrick Mahomes and took it back for a touchdown. It was just right here, this glorious 7 seconds from 4:55 to 4:48. They scored 14 points, and that was enough. They had 2 other field goals. Again, at the end, it did look a little anxious. It did seem like they were going to be able to come back, but the Raiders ran legit 4-minute offense and ran the ball where the Chiefs could not stop them, and they couldn't get them off the field to get another shot back at it. So a very painful loss for the Chiefs, dropped them back into the mix in, potentially being a very, very difficult for them to get the 1 seed, maybe impossible. I haven't played with all the simulators for it, but not great. The last game here today, the Eagles were dominating the Giants and then let them come back in this game and almost messed up and gave them a shot to get back into it. They cut it back to 20-18 and 30-25 with possession at one point and a chance to be able to come back and tie it. So the Giants playing tough, the Eagles getting a win they needed and everything that they were looking for. So again, we'll take a quick look at the current standings. The playoffs, if they were to start this moment, the Ravens are the current number 1 seed in the AFC. They are beating the 49ers as we speak, 16-12. The Dolphins are right there as the 2 seed, 11-4. Chiefs winning the AFC West. Jaguars currently leading the AFC South. And then the Browns as the top wild card, the Bills as the second wild card and the 6th seed, the Colts as the current 7 seed. So we're going to switch around and play with a couple different scenarios to show you some of the options of things that could happen. I'm going to show this on there's been a couple different tools that we can use. So first I'll show the New York Times tool. Obviously, if the Bills just beat the Patriots, they go to, it's going to go through here. It's going to say 98%. They would need everything to fall wrong the other way. It's even with a loss to the Dolphins, they're going to sit at 95% likelihood. There are multiple scenarios next week where simply with a couple, I think 2 specific losses, if the Seahawks win and I believe the Panthers was another one, it goes to 100%. So again, the Panthers isn't the most likely one, but you can also see it with a couple different ones. If just the Chiefs beat the Bengals, there's 2 very likely ones. So if the Bills beat the Patriots, the Seahawks beat the Steelers, and the Chiefs beat the Bengals, the Bills will lock up a playoff spot regardless of what happens in Week 18. So that shows you how close they are to where those things lie. The Bills are in very, very near position to be able to do that. The key game will be regardless of the outcome tonight. Yeah. So let's say even if the 49ers come back and beat the Ravens tonight, which means the Dolphins will be very pumped for a game next week to be able to play the Ravens because they'll have a chance at the number 1 seed. Let's say the Ravens win that. Well, now that Bills-Dolphins game is not only a spot for the AFC East, a division championship game, it also is an immediate flip-flop where the winner becomes the 2 seed and the loser becomes the 6 seed. So again, those are not crazy matchups to root for. The Seahawks beating the Steelers, I think, is pretty likely. The Chiefs beating the Bengals, I think, is pretty likely. Both the Seahawks and Chiefs played some crazy games. The Steelers won this week. So again, we'll let it play out and see where it goes. There are other combinations that can also cause that. But even with all those other scenarios, the Bills would then become the 2 seed and would be able to host not only an opening round playoff game, potentially hosting the Colts or the Texans or someone like that. They also would host the second round matchup where they would play, in this scenario, probably the winner of the Chiefs and the Browns, the Chiefs and the um, Dolphins. So it might be Chiefs Dolphins in the opening round of the playoffs. So that'll be an interesting one to be able to watch. And then the Bills would host the winner of that game, depending on the other matchups. So I'm going to show you another tool here that has some options here. So again, we'll assume the 49ers win here. Actually, the Ravens are winning now. So we'll keep the Ravens as a win. Again, next week, I'm going to assume most of the teams that are supposed to win do. So I think Cleveland will win, Detroit, Baltimore. I think Buffalo will win against New England, Atlanta. I think Houston will win. I think the Indianapolis will win. The Raiders are on a hot 2-game winning streak. So we'll see. Actually, I'll take that back. The Raiders are on a hot 2-game winning streak, and the Colts just lost pretty bad. The Jags are on a rough skid. I don't think they're going to lose to Carolina. We'll pick the Rams, the Eagles. We'll say the Bucks keep winning, 49ers. I do think Seattle will beat Pittsburgh. I think Denver will win again. I do think KC will get right and beat Cincinnati. And then I'll say Minnesota beats Green Bay. So again, we're going to go into the final week very similar to this week. The Browns are the top wild card seed. The Jags still there at number 4. But now some of the matchups here in the final week get really interesting. So I think that it's going to put it into a spot where you have that AFC East championship game, and all of a sudden the Bills can jump up to a 2 seed. I think the Browns will win and lock up that number 5 seed. I think the Jaguars, again, they don't have a super tough matchup. I think they'll beat Tennessee. So I think that they'll be in a spot where we're going to have, some pretty simple matchups to root for here. If the Chargers were to get a win, it doesn't really change much for the Chiefs. The Colts could make it, so we would play the Raiders. If the Texans win, we'd play the Texans. If the Colts win, we'd play the Raiders, and the Raiders would make the playoffs. That's pretty crazy to see. Same thing, I think, no matter what, we can't actually get to the number 1 seed. There's no real scenario to play with that we could make it all the way to the 1 seed, because one of the teams that would have to lose would be both the Ravens and the Dolphins, and they play each other, so they can't both lose. But this shows you some of the scenarios where we would go in there. If we were to lose to the Dolphins in the final week, we would then head to Arrowhead as the number 6 seed to play there. So that kind of swing where this is what those teams are going to be playing for. And I think this is a very real scenario, whether that's the Colts, the Texans, or the Raiders. I think it's a very similar matchup. So hosting the Colts, the Raiders, or the Texans, or going to Kansas City, that is going to be what's on the line between those teams in week 18 for the AFC East division. So not only a home game versus an away game, but the difference between going to Patrick Mahomes' house versus bringing the Colts, the Texans, or the Raiders to your house. Just an enormous swing. Also, that team, you play the winner. So say that the Dolphins win that, they then get to host the winner of Kansas City versus Buffalo. If Buffalo wins, they get to host the winner of Kansas City versus Miami. Just an enormous matchup. So that's going to be a ton of fun to be able to watch and to be able to monitor as we go through here. I'm going to look up some of the questions that they had, T-Rent obviously asking to go through there. Richard, so there is a scenario where the Bills wind up with a 2 seed and have home field advantage. The one I just went through, I think is very realistic. Like that's with no additional benefit. So I had all the other teams, Jacksonville, Kansas City, Cleveland, all those other teams winning. Some of those things could even help us to be able to make it even an easier outcome. The Ravens just scored again, so they're up 23-12, up 11 points on the 49ers. So looking good going into that game next week against Miami. Joe Sopchak here asking, what seed would Miami get if the Bills went out and Miami loses out? So I think in this scenario that I played with, that was them losing both games. So I do think the worst Miami can be is the 6 seed. They're a healthy amount up. They have a 2-game lead on anyone else. So the only ones who could catch, matter of fact, they have a 3-game lead on every other team. They have a 2-game lead on us. So the only way that we could pass them is they lose next week to the Ravens and lose to us. So any other scenario, if they just win one of those games, they stay as a top 2 seed. So their only scenarios realistically are a 2 and a 6. It's either the 2 seed or the 6 seed. They already are confirmed for the playoffs, and if they win one of the next 2 games, they stay as a 2 seed. If they lose both of those games, they drop to a 6 seed, and those are pretty much the only options that the Dolphins have. Jeffrey here saying the Chiefs could fall to a 4 seed. Yeah, they only have a 1-game lead on the Jaguars, so it would take them losing to if they lost to Cincinnati and the Chargers. Heck, the Broncos could even. So there's a scenario where they don't even win the division. If they lose their next 2 games, the Chiefs could drop out of the playoffs. There is a legit scenario where they're out of the playoffs. If Jacksonville, I have them winning. Where's Jacksonville's other game? So I have Jacksonville winning, I think, both games here to get to 10-7. They're currently 9-7. So if they were to lose one of those, Jacksonville, say they lost to Tennessee and Kansas City goes 1-1. Yeah. So Kansas City would have to lose out to drop. But the funny part is, if they lose out, they not only could fall to the 4 seed, they could get knocked out of the playoffs. So if they win either of the games, they probably stay as a 3 seed. They could. Well, I'll look at some of the tiebreakers to see if there's a chance where they get passed by the Jaguars and don't fall all the way out. But I'd have to play around maybe if no, heck, here's a fun one. If the Chiefs lose the next 2 games, which is it's the Chargers and the it's the Chargers and Bengals. So I don't think that's going to happen, but I think they're going to lose to the Raiders today. So all things are possible. If the Chiefs lose to the Bengals and to the Chargers, then the week 18 game between the Broncos and the Raiders becomes the AFC West championship game. That team takes the 4 seed and the Chiefs fall out of the playoffs. So I'm not going to say it's not possible, but to Jeffrey's point here, I actually can't find not an easy scenario where they go to the 4 seed. I either have them fall from the 3 seed to out of the playoffs if they lose those 2 games. So I'd have to play around with a couple other ones. Maybe if the Broncos and Raiders lose their other games, if the Raiders lose to the Colts, that could swap the Chiefs to the 4 seed. And the same thing if the Broncos, oh no, they'd have to have even if the Broncos lose to the Chargers, the Raiders would would win the division because of their win today. They won the head-to-head and they have the tiebreaker. So that's kind of fun to see. So again, appreciate you guys jumping in here and hanging out. This has been a ton of fun. We'll be going through these scenarios here the last 2 weeks, kind of talking through all the different possibilities. We'll go through and play around with everything that can happen here as the games go. Again, make sure you check out our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. All kinds of fun things to be able to do. You can do over-under picks. You can do redrafts for new lineups to be able to go through the playoffs. They even do drafts in the playoffs where you can go in and draft matchups through the playoffs. It's actually really fun in wild card weekend and in the divisional round where you have all the different games going. It's a lot of fun through those weekends. So really good, entertaining stuff to be able to see. We appreciate you guys coming in here. Again, we're just getting started with the Greg Thompson Sports Show and talking about some other things outside of just the Bills. But it is still just getting started. So pressing the like button, leaving a comment in the YouTube comments goes a long ways to be able to help us get the word out there about the new show. So that would really, really appreciate it if you guys could take a moment and press the like button, give us a rating or review, give us a comment in the YouTube comments. That would go a long, long ways. But on behalf of my awesome producer, Chris Seth, I am Greg Thompson. You've been listening to the Greg Thompson Sports Show, and we are